I'm often asked questions about the background research involved in developing the Redgate-Howarth system oboe. In truth, this has been a mixture of quite in-depth and complex empirical research aligned with some trial and error testing of key work and ideas, and on one or two occasions we had to wait until we produced a piece of key work in order to see if it would do what we were expecting it to do. So I want to show you some of the background research that took place. We wanted to try and develop the range of the instrument, and in order to do that we experimented with a number of different ways of looking for a fourth octave key. In doing this we discovered a lot about the function of the octave keys, how they work and what they do, and some potential other areas for research and development. So watch this space for future updates on that. One of the things we did was to work with three staples, and as you can see from the picture, we took Chudno staples and we adapted them by drilling three holes at different sizes and on the different staples in different positions on the staples. And they got, as you can see from this one, small chimneys which makes them just stick up from the body of the staple. Now what we did is to experiment with these holes in order to see what effect they would have on producing high pitches on the instrument. So we would cover two of the holes with blue tack and work with the third hole. We did tests in two different ways with these. I worked with each of the three staples with cane bound onto the staples in order to test them on the instrument, and we worked with every single fingering on the instrument to see what happened with these particular holes opened. I gathered together a great deal of data about what these would do, and though they didn't actually give us a fourth octave key position, they did give us a lot of other information about octave keys and the response of pitches on the instrument to holes in this part. In addition to doing this testing, this standard empirical testing, we also did some tests using impedance testing with colleagues and friends at the Open University, Dr. David Sharp and Dr. Adrian Manu Mani. Here is a typical example of an impedance curve made at the Open University, showing the use of the three of the holes on one of the staples by unfingering bottom B flat. And this gave us an idea of the formants or harmonics involved in the hole and the staple, which gave us an idea of what kind of pitches will be strongest and what we'd be most likely to hear from the instruments. This amassed an enormous amount of data, but in itself we didn't actually solve the problem we were trying to solve. So we then went on to look at other aspects of finding places for an octave key position. Having not found the octave key we were looking for, we then became a little bit more radical in our tests and drilled a set of holes into a student model oboe. As you can see, there are octave cups down this top part of the instrument here. Each octave cup has a different size hole in it, ranging from something like half a millimetre, I think, to 2.3 millimetres. And we tested every fingering on the instrument using three different reeds, blocking up every other hole but one, and trying every single one of the octave cups in the hole in order to see what the results would be. This created an enormous database of information, of which this is just a small part. You can see that the hole at the side here, hole 1, hole 2, and the hole sizes that we put in it there, and this gives us the information as to what the kind of response was. This is at the upper end of the fingering, so this is the very highest F on the oboe moving up to the very top C. You can see the kind of experiment, so the C's worked beautifully here, but the B, the A didn't quite work as well, and down here they weren't working at all. We've colour coded it to try and bunch together responses to see how well they work. The red is really bits that don't work. The yellow works, but in the case of here, for example, it's about a semitone out. The green actually works quite well. So you can see we were able to get patterns and understandings of what these holes would do in terms of finding octave, possible fourth octave position. In the end of the day, in spite of all this research, we didn't find a place for the fourth octave key specifically, but what we did find is that one part of the body of the instrument seem to respond more to helping the high range be produced, and that is the area around the two trill keys, and that is why we put the small third key in that place, because that was the most responsive area. And it's interesting that many of the high note fingerings, of course, use one or both of the trill keys in order to create those high pitches. So that, in a sense, while this didn't find the fourth octave key whole, it did highlight for us the most likely response area. And as I say, it gave us a lot of other information about octave keys and their responses. You can see here's early stages of keywork development. This is still on the student model oboe. You see the blue type where we plugged up some of the holes, and here our first attempts at developing keys that could be used up here, duplicates of the C sharp and the D trill keys that would control these further up the instrument, just as a test to see if they could work. And I was really inspired to try doing it this way from the spoon keys on the saxophone, which obviously stick up a bit more, but they're in the same kind of position on the instrument. Here now you can see where we decided to stack the three keys one on top of the other. There isn't a lot of space around here, as you can see. For another hole in the keywork it would be very difficult, so we stacked them. And this is the first level of keys that we put in here. We called it the hamburger key, because it's got three bits, a bit like a hamburger. Here's the second level with the second key in place, as much smaller hole as you can see. And here is the third level added as well, and the three control touch pieces at the side there. Here you can see the hamburger key from the side. Of course, the padding isn't in place at the moment, but you can see how the keys are going to work in place. Here, once again, are the three keys on the Coca-Cola wood instrument now, and instantly you can see this small hole that we drilled in the side of this key quite clearly here. This was done as an experiment. I've been testing with top B and top C, looking at very, very slightly allowing the main hole in this key to leak. And of course, because of the nature of the pad on flesh on the finger, it's very difficult to become accurate. And so this hole enables a much greater degree of accuracy for creating these top pitches. In my experiments for the high range, I was aware that in developing the new instrument and new ways of using the keywork at the top of the instrument, I might have to develop a new set of fingerings. And it struck me quite forcefully that a lot of our development of fingerings in the top range of the instrument on the oboe is done purely by trial and error. We experiment, we try this, we try that. And because I needed to find new pitches relatively quickly, I wanted to avoid the trial and error and see if I could actually find some formula or foundation for a more carefully worked process of finding the high pitches. And so I gathered together about 170 high note fingerings from any source I could find, from top G upwards, and decided to ask myself to gather them all together and to group them so I could see if there were any patterns in the fingerings across the board that I could use as a foundation for my own fingering work. In fact, most fingerings produce 2 or even 3 patterns of fingerings, which I found could be used as a foundation fingering for developing other high note fingerings. I call these generic fingerings, and here we've worked with the impedance testing again in order to look at 3 generic fingerings on a very high A, generic 1, generic 2, generic 3, and you can see that the high peaks, the strong formants on this impedance curve, are all very, very closely. That's not quite so close, but the 3 highest are very close together, and indeed these 3 will all produce a high A, slightly different pitches and slightly different response to articulation, but they are there and they work. I then began work on experimenting with these generic fingerings, trying out every single individual key change or groups of key changes I could, putting keys down, taking keys off, in order to see what the modifications would do and whether I could come up with sets of modifications that would be most likely to work on the instrument in developing a better high pitch for, say, an A or a B flat. Some of them stopped the pitches working altogether, some of them altered the pitch, which also gave me, of course, a whole sets and sets of microtonal fingerings, 10 cents, 20 cents, so you're down to just under an eighth of a tone, for the 20 cents, 25 cents being an eighth of a tone. And so I was able to develop these and find the 2 or 3 modifications that would be most likely to help me generate an actual usable top note fingering. And indeed, that was the case. Going up to the high C on the new oboe, I've been able to find fingerings which are very, very easy to use with tremendous facility and accuracy. Interestingly, it also gave me sets of fingerings which work on the standard oboe without recourse to teeth on the reed. The one problem I did have in gathering the original sets of fingerings together is that while people gave fingerings, perhaps wrote fingerings down or suggested them, very often they didn't give information about the use of teeth on the reed, because of course putting the teeth on the reed in the top of the instrument is a very common practice. What it does, of course, is it raises the pitch a semitone almost on many of the fingerings, and so I soon began to look at, let's say, B flat fingerings, and to see that some of them were actually A fingerings which had obviously been bitten up to a B flat through the use of the teeth, and I was able to move them to demote them down to a lower pitch, and of course without the use of the teeth they did actually produce a pitch pretty much a semitone lower, because one of my aims was to get rid of the use of teeth on the reed altogether, and that has been possible on the new instrument. This also, of course, has given a foundation for the development of high note fingering to the future. Developing the multiphonic key took a different course. Here is a computer-generated model of the multiphonic key. Here you can see it on the instrument, and here on the final set of key work for the instrument. I knew this would work because I spent a lot of time unscrewing and screwing that little top plate in order to experiment with what was possible on that. It's quite a challenging thing to do, and of course in performance unscrewing that top plate is not a good idea if you've got to put it back again in the right place and not miss your high notes. And so I was quite pleased to develop this key, which has worked wonderfully, even though we've now modified it and found a faster way of executing the change from closed to open. I did actually try a second place on the instrument, which also produced multiphonics through effectively what would be we could call a leaking key, but as I could only get it to produce 2 or 3 multiphonics, I decided it wasn't worth it. But this key has worked very, very well on the instrument, and as I say, on the second model of the instrument, this has been slightly adapted so that it is even quicker and more efficient to use in practice.